I'll actually start with like a brief intro. And again, for folks who joined a couple minutes into it, if you are cooking along, I've already pre-measured out. So in the restaurant world, we say mise en place, everything in its place. So we've already measured out, or I've already measured out all the things that I need for today's class. So you can take the next couple moments to keep gathering those things as needed. So my name is Jocelyn Ramirez. I'm the chef and founder of Todo Verde based here in Los Angeles. And I started Todo Verde really because I wanted to be able to create plant-based versions of all the things that I grew up eating, all the nostalgic flavors, all the things that people told me that I couldn't eat anymore or that I would lose a part of the culture because I was choosing to be plant-based. And so over time, I've been able to really evolve some of these recipes, some of them being family recipes, others just being things that obviously I just love eating growing up here in Los Angeles. And I'm so happy to be able to share those recipes with more and more people, including people who have purchased La Vida Verde, which is my cookbook that came out last year. And we've continued to offer these online classes for folks who are cooking more and more at home, which is so awesome. And that's the goal, right? My goal is not to keep these recipes as secrets, but to share them so that you can share them with your friends, your family, and it continues to kind of snowball from there. So let's get into the recipe itself. Again, we're making the mushroom tinga, the black bean smash, and the cashew crema. I'm gonna start with the black bean smash just because I want that's gonna need to cook on the stove for a few minutes. And as that's cooking, we can work our cashew cream and then come back to the mushroom tinga towards the end, which is pretty quick. It comes together really, really quickly. And actually all three of these recipes you'll find are very, very simple. And once you know how to make them, it's going to be so easy, such a breeze to get them done. So starting with the black bean smash, I'm just looking down. I have the ingredients listed just to make sure, because the way I cook is actually a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And sometimes I need to bring myself back to the actual recipe I know is like tried true, works every time. So the black bean smash, I have here some black beans that have already been cooked off. These are just whole frijoles de la olla, black beans. Of course, if you didn't have black beans on hand, you can use a pinto or whatever bean that you happen to have on hand. And we're doing 3 cups of this. They've been strained, they've been rinsed. If you did cook the beans yourself, you could use just the bean broth because we're gonna essentially cook these again. So they're gonna get cooked twice to make them really, really soft, overcooked, bursting, and then we'll blend them up to make a paste out of them or a smash out of them. So if you have that bean broth, if you cook them yourselves, you can absolutely use that bean broth. Otherwise, we're going to use vegetable broth in this recipe. So I have my 3 cups and I actually just have a pot here, a small pot on the stove. I'll bring it over and I'll start kind of layering in all the things in here. So I have my 3 cups of my black beans, strained, rinsed off. I have a 1/4 cup of oil, and I like to add a little bit of oil to this. Anytime you see like refried beans, there's typically lard or some sort of fat in there. I'm just adding a 1/4 cup of oil. I have half a cup here because it's for the 2 recipes for the tinga and also for the beans. So I'm gonna add just a 1/4 cup of it. So let me just look at that, make sure I'm only stealing that 1/4 cup. Put a little bit more. There we go. All right, so I have my 1/4 cup of oil to give a little bit of that like fatty note to it and to help kind of like emulsify the beans once I blend everything together. I have a cup here. I'm actually using this brand called Better Than Bouillon, where you essentially have 1 cup of water and you add a teaspoon of this paste, and it's supposed to make a cup of vegetable broth, right? So, you know, it still has a little bit of that residue. You're supposed to use hot water, but I know I'm going to boil this, so it'll be fine. But essentially, you need 1 cup of your vegetable broth. And I still have a little bit down here that it's like this paste that ends up dissolving with boiling water to make a broth. So I have that in there. So far very liquidy, right? Because we're gonna overcook these beans. We need that liquid to kind of make them nice and smooth. And then our aromatics, our seasoning here, we have a half teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes, which are just, you know, your average red chili flakes. If you have chile de árbol flakes, you can use that, or any other chile that you have on hand. We have half a teaspoon of ground cumin, which is going to give it a nice like earthiness, a nice depth of flavor. I have one bay leaf. This is pretty small. I probably could have added two, but I have one bay leaf in there. I have some freshly cracked black pepper, and then I'm going to add salt to taste. So I'm using a kosher salt here, and I'm just going to add about a couple pinches of salt, and I can taste it later just to see how that's all working together. I'm going to grab a spoon here, just give this a little mix just to get all those spices well incorporated. I like to try to tuck down the bay leaf towards the bottom of the liquid, so it's kind of hiding in there now. And just to make sure that I try to get that flavor nice and infused into the beans as they're cooking the second time. And I'm just going to set the lid on, place it on my stove on about medium heat, and I'm just going to let that work for at least a good 10-15 minutes or so. I want it to come to a boil, a very low boil, just above a simmer, and just to make sure that I really allow those seasonings to bloom, to blossom, that bay leaf to release its flavor, and the beans again to just overcook essentially, so that when I'm ready to mash this up with my mixer, my hand blender, all I have to do is pull out that bay leaf, and they're going to be so smooth and creamy and so soft. It's going to be so easy to blend them up till smooth. So we're just going to let that work, and then we're going to move on to our cashew cream. I just want to know if everybody is doing okay with that black bean smash recipe so far. Okay, I think everybody's good. All right. If anything comes up, please feel free to ask. I just like to wait a few minutes in between just to see if anybody needs help with like numbers of the ingredient amounts or anything like that. Okay, so we are going to move on to the cashew cream, another really, really simple recipe. So there's a couple of optional ingredients. Actually, let me grab my acidophilus from my fridge. I'm actually not going to add the acidophilus today just because I'll explain why, but this is an ingredient that I typically have on hand in my fridge. They're probiotic capsules that I use to help ferment things so that they have an added note of kind of cheesiness, funkiness. That chile is still lingering in the air from the chipotle that I blended. And I'll talk about that in a second when I get to the thing. You're going to be like, why does she blend chiles? I'll mention that in a second. So I have 3/4 cups of cashews. Typically I have these raw cashew pieces on hand. Today I have these like whole fancy cashews. So they're pretty much intact. They're very beautiful cashew pieces. I like to buy raw cashew pieces typically because anytime I use cashews, they're likely going to end up blended up into a sauce, a cream, a cheese, a cheesecake. So I don't care that they are whole pieces or broken pieces. And the broken pieces are actually a lot cheaper to purchase than these whole ones. So I like to buy those like fragmented pieces. Raw is important here because if you get toasted or any flavored cashews, you can still make it work. However, you're adding another element of flavor to the cashews. And I only like to use cashews for their texture, which is going to be a nice creamy texture. I don't like to use cashews for their flavor. So in fact, anytime I use cashews, I'm really trying to hide the fact that there's any cashews in the recipe itself. So if they're toasted or they have other things going on, it just kind of it makes you wonder what else is in there. Are those cashews? And I don't want that. So I've just been soaking them in room temp water for at least an hour, maybe 2 hours or so. I'm using a high power blender. I'm going to be using a Vitamix. So that's going to help blend nice and smooth. If you have a home blender, it's nice to let these soak in for at least a couple hours. If you're in a pinch, you can use hot water, and hot water also helps them to absorb that liquid a lot faster. And then if you have the time, you can absolutely let these soak in your fridge overnight, and that will make sure that they're completely saturated with liquid. And we're just gonna dump this liquid. So it was only meant to soak them. I'm gonna take these over to my sink, and I'm just gonna drain all of that liquid out. So just using my fingers to help drain that out. And I just want those nice soaked bits of cashew. I'm gonna bring my blender over. So this was or is 3/4 cups of those soaked cashews that I am going to end up just throwing into my Vitamix cup here. So they're nice and plump. They should be slightly, slightly soft to the touch, and you know that they're gonna break down very easily in your blender. I also have here a 1/4 cup of fresh water. So I just have some filtered water, room temp, that I'm gonna put in here. And this is the water that's gonna help break it down till it's nice and smooth. And sometimes when you blend up your cashew creams, you may find that the cream feels a little bit loose at the beginning. And if it does feel loose, know that it typically tends to thicken up if you leave it in the fridge for a couple hours or even up to overnight. And it will slightly thicken. So even if it feels a little bit loose, it's okay. If it feels too thick, know that it's gonna, again, thicken up. So if it feels too thick, as soon as you blend it, it's gonna keep thickening up. So you wanna maybe hit it with a little bit more water or citrus if you need to. So before I move on, I wanna talk about a couple different varieties of cashew cream. So in my book, I have maybe 2 to 3 different ways that I make this cashew cream. Right now, I'm gonna make it like the super quick, easy, I can eat it right now for lunch way. And then I'm gonna talk you through another way with some of these optional ingredients, which would be I'm gonna eat it tomorrow or the day after, because I'm gonna allow it to sit on my countertop and ferment for the next couple days. And it's very, very simple to do either or. The second one just requires more time, right? For it to just sit and get funky and ferment and do its thing. So if you were gonna do the second way, then all you would do is you would literally blend your water and your cashews, no salt, no lemon juice, just water and cashews, and blend it until it's nice and super creamy, which I can do right now just to show you. And you're just gonna blend until it's nice and smooth. And then once it's nice and smooth, you're gonna add some of these probiotic capsules. Now, these capsules, they look just like your average vitamins. It's a white powder inside. These are live cultures, and you can see they're in this little capsule. And essentially what you would do is you would open up the capsule and dump in the powder and discard the capsule itself. And what you want to do that after you finish blending the cream nice and smooth, because you don't want to blend up the live cultures, you'll end up killing them in the process. So what you want to do is blend your cashew cream nice and smooth, and then just mix in your cultures, or you can turn on your blender again and have the blade just be very low just to mix it in. I'm gonna turn off my washing machine, it keeps beeping. There we go. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so I'm just gonna blend real quick and just kind of do a round as if we're making the fermented version. I can see that my beans are boiling, so we can take a look at that as I blend. So I'm gonna lower that heat a little bit. Let those cook for another few minutes, and those are almost done. So I blend quite a bit, as you can see. I probably could have gone a little bit longer with it. And essentially what I'm trying to do with my Vitamix, this tamper, is scrape down the sides. I can see here that I still have a little bit of texture, like chunkiness of the bits of cashew, and I don't want that. So I probably would keep blending this just a little bit more, but you can see here towards the bottom of the tamper, you have this nice, smooth, creamy, stick to the back of a spoon cashew cream. I could still feel, even as I run my hand through it, a little bit of the bits of cashew. If you couldn't break that down enough, you could, or you don't have a blender like this, you could use a spatula and scrape down the sides, pause, scrape down, and then go back to keep blending. You could also add a touch more of your water just to help break that down a little bit further. But let's say, for example, this was like as smooth and creamy as we would like it. Like, look there. I don't know if you can see that little chunk right there. Like that would get clogged up in my squeeze bottle. And I don't want that. And obviously anybody who sees that is going to be like, what is this chunk in the cream? It's supposed to be cream, right? So you're looking for that texture of the cream. And so what I would do is, if this were already like as smooth and creamy as I want it, no little bits that I see in there, keep working it in the blender for a little bit. Then I'll go ahead and put in my couple capsules of probiotic powder only, and just give it a little blitz just to mix it in, and then scrape it out with the spatula, put it in a glass bowl, cover it with some cheesecloth, and let it sit and ferment. And you know, it can take 15 hours, it can take 18 hours, it could take longer. If think about your environment. If it's kind of chilly in your house, or if it's really hot and humid, it's going to go a bit faster. If it's cold, it's going to take a little bit longer. And so essentially what I do is I go and I check it out, I smell it. Sometimes if the cultures are super alive, it's bubbling. Like it'll actually be bubbling and kind of like, hello, I'm alive, I'm your cashew cream. Um, and so those are kind of the things to look for. Smell, you can give it a taste. Obviously it doesn't have salt yet, so it's gonna taste pretty cashewy, for lack of a better word. That's what it's gonna taste like. So that's kind of what to look out for if you're doing that route. And then once you get to that nice, funky, fermented, maybe a day or two has passed, maybe even more if you want to explore a little bit more, then at that point, once you have that funky fermentation, then you can add your salt. You can add 1 teaspoon of nutritional yeast if you want. Nutritional yeast, if it's a new ingredient to you, it's typically this slightly kind of orangey, yellowy color, and it tastes very cheesy. So a lot of folks in the plant-based world add nutritional yeast to cheeses and creams and things to give it that flavor. So at that point, once you get that fermented flavor, you can add your nutritional yeast, you can add some lemon juice, you can add salt, and really kind of bring all the flavors together at that point, because the lemon juice and the salt will kill the cultures, which is why you don't want to do that prior to fermentation. So again, I'm making the quick version today, but I just wanted to walk you through that in case you wanted to make that at a later time if you're not making it today. And because I'm making the quick version, I'm actually going to add my, I'm going to add the nutritional yeast since I already measured it out. I have a teaspoon of nutritional yeast, and I have, so I'll throw that in my blender. And then I just have to squeeze 1 to 2 tablespoons of lemon juice into this and add some salt, and I'll have a cream that's ready to eat right now. What's going to be lacking from this cream is that fermented flavor, which is a great thing to experiment with. And obviously a lot of the like the crema mexicana and stuff that we grew up eating, we love that flavor because of the fermentation. So, you know, if you have the time and the capacity to do that, I would say explore it and just see what the differences are of the flavor profile. All right, so I'm gonna just pan down. I have my blended cashew. Let me just move this out of the way actually. And then I'm just literally going to use a measuring spoon. I have some lemons from the tree in my backyard, and I'm just gonna squeeze in a tablespoon of lemon juice to start off. And then I might add a second. I'll likely add a second because essentially what the lemon juice is doing is adding a little bit of tanginess to it. So this is kind of trying to emulate some of that fermentation, you know, so this is why it's like the quick one too. And you might find that, whoa, dropped a whole piece in there. Let me pull that out. You might find that with the fermented version, you don't add as much lemon juice to it because obviously it already has like a good amount of tanginess and tartness to it because it's been fermenting. So that's why the amounts are slightly different. So this one is probably going to ask me for more like 2 tablespoons of it, whereas the fermented one, I might be looking at more like maybe 1, maybe even less, depending on the flavor that I'm looking for. Let me add some salt to this. I'm gonna add a few pinches of salt. And the saltiness, obviously, you want a good amount. I have cream on my hands. You want a good amount of salt in there because obviously cremas and cheeses and things are supposed to be pretty salty. So I'm gonna take this back to my blender and blend it until I incorporate those ingredients and make sure it's nice and smooth. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my heat on my beans. It's probably been about 10 minutes or so, and they're boiling really, really nicely. So I'm gonna turn that off. All right, so let me check this out again. So I could see here it's a little bit more loose. I have that lemon juice in there, so that's more liquid that's helping it to blend until it's nice and smooth, giving it a taste. I'm gonna add a little bit more salt, that other tablespoon of lemon juice. I can definitely taste the nutritional yeast in there. And that is almost ready to go. Let me get these seeds out of the way here. Any questions so far as folks are making your cashew cream at home? Is everything going okay?
Quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry, just the consistency of the crema, like, is it supposed to be sort of like less viscous, more viscous? Um, I just want to make sure I have enough water in it so that it like,
Yeah.
am I going to drizzle it? I'm just sort of curious about the consistency.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yes, you definitely want it to be probably a little bit more loose and drizzly
Okay.
because it will slightly thicken up as it sits, especially if you pop it in your fridge, it's going to thicken up even more so. So, you want it to feel a little bit drizzly right now and know that it's going to kind of thicken up slightly over the because the cashews are still going to continue to absorb liquid, so that's why it'll thicken up a little bit more.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so let me give this one last blend and then we'll bring it back and I'll show you that consistency we're looking for. And I'll also pour it into a squeeze bottle. You see my sauce? And right now, as I'm blending, the consistency is very loose right now because it's hot. Actually, when I opened it earlier, I actually saw a little bit of that steam coming out. You can maybe see a little bit of that steam coming out of my blender because it's maybe not, the camera might not be catching it, but it's hot because of the blender working. And so when I pop this in my fridge, it'll allow it to thicken up a little bit more. Now that's perfect. Good amount of salt, tartness from the lemon. I can't taste the fact that there's cashews in here. I taste the nutritional yeast doing its job in the back note. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pan down, and I like to have a little squeeze bottle on hand at home. And I'm just going to, you'll see right now it's pretty loose. So check that out. It's a very, very loose consistency. I can easily pour this. So it's not like I'm scooping it out of the blender. I'm pouring it very easily into my squeeze bottle. And I'm actually gonna pop this, ooh, I'm gonna pop this squeeze bottle in the fridge just to allow it to chill until I'm ready to use it towards the end of this recipe. But that is done, out of the way. It's a very tiny squeeze bottle. I still have a little bit left in the blender, but I have my little squeeze bottle full. I can feel that the crema in here is warm. So I'm just gonna pop it in the fridge just to let it kind of settle down a little bit and rest and chill so slightly. And then you'll see the consistency by the time we're done with class when we're squeezing that over. It'll feel like it holds up a little bit better. So any questions about the crema as we circle back to our beans?
Jocelyn, how long can you keep crema? Like if you made it and you want to keep it in the fridge for a few days or something?
Yeah, that's a great question. I typically have mine in the fridge for like a week, you
Mhm.
know? So anywhere between like 4 to 7 days, typically is how long I have mine hanging out. So it lasts quite a bit. And I'll also say that it freezes really, really well. So if you made a batch and you know, oh, I only typically go through like half of this batch, you can store the other half in the freezer and then just bring it out of the freezer, put it in the fridge and let it thaw out, and it'll be ready for your next round of use. Especially if you make the fermented version, because obviously that takes more time. And then you freeze that, then it's kind of like, oh, I did the job for 2 rounds of eating, you know? So I'm going to grab my hand blender that I have just down below here. And we're gonna blend up these beans. Obviously you can blend up your beans in a blender, but the hand blender just for me is a little bit easier. If you're using a blender, because the bean mixture is hot, you want to make sure that you are allowing the mixture to breathe. So if I were to be blending my beans, my hot beans in a blender, I would likely just create a little bit of a gap like this so that I have air that can come in to the blender cup itself, and throw a towel around it so that if it splatters, then it's hitting the towel and not your face. I don't know if you've ever had a blender explode on you because the solution in there is so hot. It's happened to me. It's not fun. It happened a long, long time ago. So just make sure you're allowing that air to circulate through as you're blending. So for the beans that are on the stove, we can take a look at how these came out. So nice and soft, and I could use just like a bean masher if I wanted to, but I like the way that the blender gives me a nice smooth consistency. You can see the ratio of that good amount of liquid that I have in here, and let me actually move this over just a little bit there. So you can see it's like quite a bit of liquid, right? And so that's gonna make sure that I get this like nice kind of spreadable, almost like hummus like consistency. That's what I like these beans to kind of emulate in a sense. So I'm just gonna put my hand blender in here, start at low, and turn that on. I'll probably splatter a little bit, trying to get all those beans whipped in. And if you find that your mixture it still feels like it's a little loose, you can turn the stove back on and allow it to thicken up. But keep in mind that this mixture is really hot right now. So it's gonna feel looser because it's hot. And as it cools down, it'll slightly thicken up as well. So I'm just turning up that hand blender. Turn it up even more. I'm just tilting my pot, getting all the mixture to go towards one side of the pot and just trying to blend that until nice and smooth. And then that should be good. So you have this like nice kind of soft consistency. Again, as this cools down, it will thicken a little bit more. so it won't be as loose and runny. But even if you find as it cools, it still feels a little bit loose and runny, turn your stove back on. Allow this to keep working, simmering, and more of that liquid will evaporate off and you'll have a thicker consistency. I'm gonna give this a taste for salt. Let me grab a spoon here. And so you want this to taste, it has a little bit of heat because it had that chili flake in there. It should feel like it has that bay leaf flavor that got infused in. The cumin, that is a very, very good black bean smash. So no salt needed on that. I'm just gonna set the lid on and I'm just gonna set it aside for now because I'm gonna use both burners to work on my mushroom tinga. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn on these two burners just to start preheating. I'm gonna just have it on low and we'll talk about our other ingredients right now. So any questions about the black bean smash? So now we have two elements, the beans, the crema. Are we all good so far? And it's pretty easy, right? Like it's just kind of like, all right, now I have like some really delicious flavored beans that are gonna go on the tostada. I have my cashew cream. It's all about making sure that each element of the dish tastes good. If the beans taste good, the crema tastes good, now the tinga is gonna taste good, you have a good tostada, you can't go wrong, you know, if every element tastes really delicious. So let's talk a little bit about the tinga. I'm gonna make a couple batches here. I have here, I had to get a mix of mushrooms because my store didn't have enough of the oyster mushrooms. So I have some sliced shiitakes in here. But oyster mushrooms typically come in this floret. If you have them in front of you, you'll see that they look kind of like this, right? And what I like to do is just use my hands to just tear them into strips so it kind of looks like chicken, like shredded chicken. Sometimes the floret at the bottom has like a nub at the bottom that's holding it all together. If that piece, that base of the mushrooms feels like it's soft enough, I will sometimes shred that as well and incorporate it into the dish. However, if I'm feeling it with my hands and it feels very tough, like even if I cook it, it's not tender enough, then I'll just cut that off and discard it, or you can compost it, of course. So you can kind of get a sense of whether or not you can use every part of the mushroom, or if you have to get rid of some of the parts that just don't seem like they're edible enough. So again, just kind of going through, hand shredding if you haven't done this already, and just getting that sort of shredded chicken-like consistency going here. Now, the thing with mushrooms, I only have about half of my mushrooms in here, FYI. I bought enough to make all of it, but I'm actually going out of town. So I thought I'll just make half now and I'll use the mushrooms later for something else, rather than like staying here and continuing to cook batch after batch. Now, the thing with mushrooms is you do have to cook them in batches if you don't have a big enough cooking surface. So, you know, for example, this bowl, like if I were to put my mushrooms in one pan and they got crowded like this in the pan, I'll never sear them. What's going to happen is like they're going to become very mushy, they're going to stew, they won't really brown and sear. There's going to be a liquid at the bottom and it's going to be very stewy or kind of soupy, and that's not at all what I'm looking for. What you want to do with mushrooms is you want to have a lot of space in between them and make sure that you're not crowding the pan, not crowding the mushrooms. And you also want to have a pretty high temperature. So you want to have like a medium high heat, just right before the point where you get to like a smoke point. In fact, sometimes when I cook mushrooms, I'll set off my fire alarm here at the house, just because I cook them at a high temperature and they will start to get sometimes a little bit smoky. And then you want to use a good amount of oil. So, you know, you want to make sure that you get that nice sear going. So I have two cast iron pans on my stove that are preheating. I had them just on low heat just to start to get warm. I'm going to turn up the heat to about medium, a little under medium, because my stove actually gets a little bit hot, a little bit too hot sometimes. And I'm just gonna drizzle in. I'm gonna make 2 batches here. So I'm gonna drizzle in some of my oil. And if you're doing it in batches, you kind of just have to eyeball, like, okay, I'm gonna make, you know, 3 batches or 4 batches, and I have a 1/4 cup of oil. How much oil am I gonna use for each one of these batches? So I am going to just make sure that I have oil covering. I probably added just a little bit too much oil. And actually, I'm forgetting to do one thing before I start getting this too hot. So let me just turn down my heat to like a low. Let me get my other blender cup. We have to blend something and just have it set aside waiting for us. So let's come back to the counter before I get, this is me wanting to multitask, but let's do it the way where we have everything ready before we start cooking. So I have another blender cup. If you only have that one blender cup, give it a rinse from the cashew cream. And then we're going to just blend in a couple of things. Now we have our, let me look at the amounts here. We have here 1/2 pound of tomatoes. The type of tomato is up to you. Whatever you have on hand, you might have Roma. I'm using here globe tomatoes or beefsteak tomatoes, and I just quartered them because it helps the blender blend them easier than just tossing a whole tomato inside of the blender. So either having or quartering them makes the process easier. I like to add those on the bottom of the blender just because as soon as they blend, they'll become liquid and they'll help me blend the garlic. So I have here 1/2 pound. I just use one of those small little scales that you can easily pick up at, you know, even a Smart and Final or a Target. A lot of people use them to weigh their coffee and stuff like that. And I just weighed out 1/2 pound. And then I have here 1 ounce of just peeled garlic that I'm gonna throw in the blender. So raw garlic, raw tomatoes, and then the key ingredient here for this dish is chipotle en adobo. Now, when you get the canned chipotle en adobo, it usually has whole chipotles in there. So chipotles that have been rehydrating in this adobo sauce, and there's lots of that adobo sauce in there. And I see a lot of people who will pull out, you know, chile by chile for each recipe they're doing, and chop it up or mince it up and add it to the recipe. Now, my kind of just, I guess the thing that I like to do with chipotles and adobo is I open up the can. I buy bigger ones, typically the ones that you find at the grocery store, these like little, maybe like 2-3 ounces or something like that. I buy ones that are a little bit more substantial. Open it up. I have the whole chiles in that sauce. Throw it in the blender, and I blend it to just make a chipotle and adobo paste. Like all of it's just a paste, as you can see here. And so that's just what I like to do that makes life a little bit easier in the kitchen, because now I can grab like a tablespoon, a 1/4 cup, or whatever, and it's already blended up and ready to go for me. And I'm using that delicious adobo, and I'm also using the chiles that are mixed in. If you haven't done this already, totally fine. You can still measure out a 1/4 cup and use some of the whole chiles, some of the adobo sauce. But this for me is just kind of like one of those kitchen hacks that makes life easier in the kitchen. So you have a mess one time and then you don't have a mess after that, because it's in a deli cup, it's in a container, and I just pull out as much as I need. So I have a 1/4 cup of it here, and I'm just going to put that 1/4 cup into my blender cup with my tomatoes and my garlic. So now I'm gonna have this like very aromatic, very delicious, spicy mixture of my tomatoes, my garlic, and my chipotle. And I'm just gonna blend this until it's pretty smooth. It'll still have a little bit of texture to it. And just set it aside and wait for our mushrooms and onions and other things to be cooked. So let me just blend this up. So now I have this tomato mixture, this tomato chipotle garlic mixture. As you can see, it's kind of a little bit runny to it. It still has a little bit of body. right? Like it's still, as you can see, has like little tiny specks of the garlic, kind of the chunkiness of the tomato in there. And I'm fine with that. I don't need it to be like super smooth, pass it through a strainer type of thing. I like that little bit of texture to it. So this is ready to go for us. And we're just going to set it aside so that when we're ready to use it in the recipe while it's cooking or while the mushrooms are cooking, all we have to do is pour some in. So again, kind of eyeball how much you have here. And if you know you're making 4 batches and you have about, I have about 2 cups worth, just under 2 cups, just shy of 2 cups. Then I know if I'm making 4 batches, I know I need to use about half a cup of this mixture per batch. So you can kind of eyeball it, or you can pull out exactly half a cup and do it that way. So going back to my preheated cooking surfaces here, I'm gonna grab a pair of tongs wherever they are. Let me find where my tongs are because I know I'm gonna need them. They're right here. I have my heat-proof tongs. I have a nice hot surface. You can check to see how hot it is by just putting down a mushroom, and you can hear that sizzle. I could see some of that smokiness happening. Let me actually open my windows because it's about to get a little smoky in here. All right, and I am going to make 2 batches because again, I'm making half, and I'm using 2 cooked surfaces, as you can see here, rather than 1, just to help me go a bit faster. And I'm gonna put these mushrooms down. Oh, that one I didn't shred very well. Let me shred that one before it gets super hot. There we go. So as you can see, not overcrowding the pan. I have a nice generous amount of oil in there, probably a little bit too generous for me. Like I don't want to see too much of a pool of oil, just a nice amount of oil, knowing that that's going to help me sear these up nicely. And because I'm using shiitakes in here, shiitakes are also very much like a sponge. So they're going to absorb quite a bit of liquid. So if you're using just oyster mushrooms, they're not as much of a sponge as these shiitakes are, which literally feel like a sponge. So they'll just be a slightly different consistency. I find that the oyster mushrooms get a little bit more crispy, and the shiitakes get a nice sear on them, but it takes a while for them to get as crispy. So notice that I have a good heat on these. I have a nice sizzle going. They're not crowded. I have not salted these yet because salt is another thing that helps the mushrooms release the water that they have, just naturally have. And so I don't want them to start releasing that water, and I don't want these to get soggy just yet. Right now, all I'm really focused on is, can you get a little sear? Can I get a little browning going? Can I see a slight bit of crispiness happening? And you can kind of mix them around if you need to. Let me turn up my heat just a little bit more. So I'm like just shy of medium heat right now. So I can see a little bit of that searing starting to happen there on that mushroom there. I want more of that.
And Jocelyn, what's your preferred way of cleaning mushrooms if you see debris before you start cooking?
Great question. So typically you don't want to wash your mushrooms. Again, they're like sponges. So if you do see some debris on them, the best trick is to just get a damp cloth or a dish towel or a really sturdy paper towel and just wipe them down. And if they are really, really dirty, sometimes they are, full of a lot of debris, then only in that case, I'll give them like a really quick flash rinse. And it's really fast. I'll have like a dry towel ready to kind of pat them down. So it's just kind of focusing on getting the debris off and then right away trying to get them dried off again. Because if you put them in water and let them hang out in water too long, they're going to absorb that water, and then this would all be kind of like a mushy, wet consistency. It's going to be really hard to get a seared browning consistency. You'll get there, but it's going to take more time. you'll probably need higher temperature and maybe a little bit more oil, and let that water that they absorb really evaporate. Okay, so once I start to see that my mushrooms are starting to get this like kind of nice browning happening, they're still going to continue to cook for a little while longer because I'm still going to add in here some spices, our onions that I've already sliced ahead of time. And I can see here that this comal is browning and searing a lot better than the back burner that has the pan on it. And it could also be because that back burner on the pan is a smaller burner. So I'll turn that one up slightly. And I want to give the back burner a little bit more time to do its thing. The front burner is looking like it's just about ready for me. So again, I'm seeing this like kind of nice browning happening here on the mushroom. And at this point, what I will do is I'll go ahead and bring over a little bit of salt. So I'll give them a good amount of salt. And then I have here amounts. Let me look at my amounts. I have here a half teaspoon of cumin and a half tablespoon of dried oregano and a little bit of fresh ground black pepper. So I'm just gonna mix these together. So again, that's a half teaspoon cumin, half tablespoon oregano. And I'm gonna sprinkle some of that on here. Again, I'm making like about a quarter of a batch here, a quarter of a batch there, right? I'm gonna mix that in. So I have my salt, my cumin, which I don't wanna do this too long because the cumin will burn, right? And then I'm gonna add another element of moisture here. I'm gonna add some of my onions. So let that work with the onions for a little bit. And essentially what I wanna do here is I want my onions to not fall over into the stove crevices, but to really start to soften. Right now, they're obviously like very sturdy slices of onion. And once they're introduced to the heat, they'll also start to sear and kind of break down slightly. And that's what I'm looking for. Let me check this back burner here. Yes, these are starting to look a lot better. I'm starting to see, like, check out that crispy piece of shiitake mushroom there. So let me work in the other ingredients here on the back burner. And I'm gonna turn on my overhead vent. So just in case you hear that excess noise there, I have some salt that I'm adding to that back burner. So a pinch of salt there. And then I'm gonna add some of my cumin, my oregano mixture. And then let me add in some of my onions on that back burner. There we go. And let me work that all in. Get that back in here. So this is definitely something you don't want to walk away from. You want to hang out here. You want to babysit it. You want to make sure everything's looking good. I want to just give these onions on the front burner maybe another minute or so. And then I'm going to introduce my tomato, garlic, chipotle mixture. And it's going to be nice and sizzly. It's going to splatter a little bit. It's going to make your space, your kitchen, super aromatic. You can see here, my onions, some of them are starting to become a little bit translucent. I have some, some bending of the onion here, so it's getting nice and soft. That's what I'm looking for. So this is just about ready to get that tomato mixture in there. Let me check this back one, still needs a couple more minutes there. And this goes pretty quickly, as you can see, right? So I am ready to add my tomato, garlic, chipotle mixture to this front burner. I don't want the onions to be all the way cooked through. Obviously, I still need to cook the tomato and the garlic in this, you know, in this mixture here. So the onions will still have time to continue cooking. So let me go ahead and grab my blender cup here, and I'm just gonna eyeball about that half cup. You see here? Perfect. And I just want to get that nice and well incorporated. Make sure all that onion, all that mushroom mixture is completely covered in this tomato, garlic, chipotle mixture, and let that cook off a little bit. And it'll be a little bit loose at first, and it'll start to, that liquid will start to evaporate. As you can see, that smoking, that sizzling is a lot of that tomato mixture evaporating. Let me add that tomato mixture to my back burner now. And of course, if you were using one long cooking surface, like a plancha, you would be doing this all at the same time. Let me add some of that tomato. A touch more. There we go. And get that all worked in. There we go. And look at how that has thickened up, right? So notice the difference between the front burner, back burner, a lot looser, a lot thicker. And when that onion and the, the garlic tomato mixture gets kind of seared, it just tastes so good. Was there a question coming in?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you could tell us a little bit about the background of Tinga and how you recreated this recipe.
Yeah, I mean, well, Tinga is a recipe. So growing up, we didn't make a whole lot of Tinga. Some of our neighbors made Tinga more than our family did. And obviously our neighbors, like many like POC neighborhoods, like we share a ton of food, right? So it's a party, everybody makes a bunch of carnitas, everybody makes a bunch of whatever. You go over, or there's so much left over that you share it with the neighbors. And so that's mostly the way that I grew up eating Tinga. And then whenever I would travel to Yucatan area, specifically like whenever I would go to Coyoacan in Mexico City, there's a mercadito there where they are known for different puestos, different stalls are known for tostadas de tinga, and it's usually made with chicken. And so that was like the spot to go to, right? Like if you want tinga, you have to go to Coyoacan and you have to get your tostadas de tinga there. And so that was, you know, when I would go to Mexico City, like that would be definitely one thing that you need to do. Also in Yucatan area, some places you can also find like really, really good tinga. And so when I decided to recreate this recipe, because the flavor of the tomato, the onion, the garlic, the chipotle is like so undeniably like a powerhouse in this dish. It's mouthwatering. You can smell it a mile away. You walk into a house that had made tinga and like you know that they made tinga, like it's just so aromatic. And so this was one that I definitely wanted to make because it's a crowd pleaser. It's so delicious. And it's so easy to recreate with the mushrooms because the mushrooms have a meaty texture. Again, I'm using shiitakes here, so it's a little bit different. But if you're using just the oyster mushrooms as the recipe calls for, you're gonna have that like nice shredded chicken consistency that is just so, so delicious. I'm gonna remove this batch of tinga and add it to my bowl here. It's just so, so delicious. So I knew that with Todo Verde, again, thinking about something that is this crowd pleaser, that even if, you know, there's mushrooms in there, because it has this delicious flavor of the chipotle, the onion and garlic that people love, that people would love this dish. And that's my work, right? Is to try to encourage people to eat more plant-based food. And if it tastes delicious, how could they deny it, right? So I love using mushrooms. They're one of my favorite ingredients. If you've been to my other classes, you've probably seen me use mushroom powders, mushroom pastes, mushrooms themselves. It's just something that I love to incorporate a ton in a lot of my food. It has this like nice depth of flavor that they bring to the table. So I'm just gonna mix my 2 batches together. And I'm gonna taste for salt. And seriously, the best is like this. Like if I use my tongs and I scrape this sort of like blackened, blistered bits off of the comal, like that is everything. It's so good. So good. Let me give my hands a rinse, give it a taste. Let me grab a fork and come back to my countertop here. I turned off my burners because I'm only making the half batch right now. And so all I want to do is like taste for salt. So good. I'm gonna add a pinch more salt. I love salt. So I always like to be a little bit heavy-handed with it. Just gonna add a little pinch, mix it in. And then we're gonna start plating our tinga. So I just mix in a little pinch. If you want your tinga to be a little bit more loose and not as dry, you know, here I have it a little bit more on the drier side. You can not cook it as long when you add the tomato mixture. You can remove it a little bit sooner so that you have a little bit more of that moisture retained. So I have some tostadas. I'll just use one for now. These are just oven baked tostadas. So they're not the fried version. So they look a little bit lighter. And let me get all my elements here. So I have my beans, my tinga here. Let me grab my cashew cream. A little bit of cilantro. Let me grab that. I didn't have micros with me, but we can grab cilantro leaves. My cashew cream has, yeah, definitely cooled down slightly. So let's pan down here. I'll just leave the cilantro here. All right, so you should be able to kind of see all my elements here. All right, so I am going to just grab the tostada and I'm going to, you can see here, my bean mixture is still very hot, nice and luscious, still nice and smooth. This is the consistency I love. And it's still really hot, so as it continues to cool, it will continue to get a little bit more thick. So I'm just gonna grab a nice spoonful here and just spread it. So you're just kind of creating a layer. If you were serving this on a serving platter, obviously the tostada is gonna move around a bunch. So a trick is just put a little bit of the beans on the bottom of the plate, and that should help the tostada to not slide around as much. Ooh, this one has like a little concave bottom, so it's probably still gonna slide around a little bit. So I have that tostada. I'm going to just layer on some of my tinga. And I really love the play on colors here. So if you were using pinto beans, that's totally fine if that's what you have on hand. But the colors are gonna be so similar. You're gonna have that brown pinto beans with the slightly reddish brown tinga. So I like to just really, you know, I like the black bean smash in here because it provides a really nice contrast. All right, so I have my tinga on there. I'm gonna give my cashew cream a little mix, and then hopefully it's gotten nice and thick. It's probably a little closer to room temp at this point, not super chilled. And then let's see if we can get a nice, yeah. It's still pretty loose, so you can see it's kind of like oozing down a little bit. The colder it gets, sometimes it's a little too stiff and it'll hold up a little bit too much. So it's like finding the right balance. And then we can use our micros or our little leaves of cilantro. And we can just garnish this. So this is our Tinga Tostada. Any questions coming up for folks? And because I use this lighter tostada, usually it's more of this like fried color, the like brownish color. So the crema isn't as contrasty with it, but these are the ones that I saw that I was like, oh, I want to get these instead today. But yeah, there is my tostada. Any questions about the process, especially for folks cooking along right now? Let me know how it's going. I'm going to take a bite.